But it's good to be back, and it's good to be back doing the fruits of the Spirit. I would like to preach on maybe any other fruit of the Spirit than patience. And God has quite the sense of humor in more ways than you can know. I try very hard, particularly on Sunday mornings, not to appear hurried or rushed or really focusing on anything other than worship. And sometimes I'm successful and sometimes not. Today, not at all, because God's sense of humor is that I would be preaching on patience during a day and in a week where I don't really necessarily have a lot of patience. I was doing okay until I got here, running a little bit later than I wanted. Usually I get here before Mass lets out across the street, but not today. So today I got to wait for traffic at Walnut Street, seeing all of you pulling into church, and here I am hung out to dry at the stop sign on Walnut Street, thinking to myself, everybody's thinking, oh, the pastor's not here yet. There he is, coming to church, trying not to be impatient because we're talking about patience today. So I make it through that, get to the study. Can't tell you how many people this summer have said, when are you going to get rid of the robe? Let me tell you, the robe is slightly cooler than the suit, but I'll get rid of the robe for the next several weeks. But I'm walking out of the study and I feel like, well, my hands are light. But I know I've got the mowing list for the announcements. I know I've already put the song sheets over here. I know I've got my bulletin, got my Bible. What else could I need? I might have liked to have a guitar so I could play with Catheel and Joanne, and it was 9:14 and I didn't have a guitar yet. So then I had to see if I could catch my family before they got here, and then I got to wait. So all of you I greeted out in the parking lot, so good to see you, so good to talk with you. I was waiting for my guitar. Very patiently, very patiently. Turns out God had a sense of humor in more ways than that. As I looked at the bulletin this week, I knew that we wanted to hear from the mission trip, which was in New Jersey the last week of my vacation. I was in New Jersey not doing missions. I was on vacation. So we wanted to hear from them. It was Vacation Bible School week, so we needed to give them a time during the children's sermon I thought would be good. Joanne and Catheel and I had been talking about how many verses to sing of each of these old hymns, these old songs that I knew that you would enjoy singing, but how long exactly would it take? And then it suddenly seemed as if the bulletin was getting awfully full. This presents a dilemma. It's a dilemma I face every single week. Who is going to learn patience and worship this week? Will it be me or will it be you? I am so tempted, I can't even tell you. But I have taken 6 pages of notes and I've turned it down to 1 page of outline. I've only really got 2 points, kind of. This is my introduction. I'm in that right now. Pretty soon I'll get to my first point. I've only really got 2 points. But I'm really torn because on the one hand, I don't want to rush through patience. That would be silly. It would make me seem impatient. But on the other hand, I've decided that the other 51 weeks of the year, I'll help you learn patience and worship, and not necessarily in today's sermon. It's a subversive thing. You don't want to think about it ever again, really, the fact that there might be. I want to talk about worship, actually, by the end, and whether we can be patient and joyful in worship or whether we find ourselves getting impatient. So what brings out the best in you? How about waiting in a long grocery line? Does that bring out the best in you? Since they're not here, I can say that I did a bit of not great driving yesterday, and it wasn't because I was impatient. It was because a red-tailed hawk came over the highway with a mouse in its talons, and I was both watching and telling the entire family in the car, look at the hawk, look at the hawk. And everyone in front of me had stopped, and I had to stop rather suddenly. I looked in the back, and Sophie and Christian's heads were against the seats in front of them. But I stopped, and then I look in the rearview mirror, and Jason and Amy Moran, 2 of our newest members, are right behind me. So I didn't have a fish on my car, but they knew it was me not driving great. I don't have a fish on me when I'm waiting in a grocery line, but this is one of the areas in which I might be tried a little bit in terms of patience. Doesn't bring out the best in me. And does it really matter whether in the line that you're allowed to have 9 items or less or 15 items or less, or the most useless line of all, 20 items or less? Well, might as well just bring everything you've got. Does it matter if the person in front of me has more items than the lane allows? Is that really super important? Am I ever really going somewhere so crucial that I cannot wait for them to check out their entire amount of purchases and then go back and put something back and bring something back in? Am I really in such a hurry? It wouldn't matter so much, except they don't understand. I've already analyzed the situation. I have chosen my lane very carefully. I have looked and seen where people are, and I'm trying to judge. They have that many things. They don't look chatty. I'll get behind them. But it turns out, no, they are chatty, and the person over here who had 17 things was really fast. It doesn't bring out the best in me. How about red lights? Not when you're the person at the front of the red light, but the person in front of you. How long do you give them once the light turns green before you remind them that the light has turned green? Take the fish off your car if you can't wait patiently at a red light, because the person in front of you will know. I'm not really allowed to blow my horn in the car very much. It startles my children, and I'm always having to give a long explanation for why it was that I thought that was an appropriate time to actually honk my horn. Twice recently, it was because we were nearly killed by the person coming over so soon. I'm not sure everybody got it. Red lights are not great. Honking horns not great. What about speed limits? Not when you're going over the speed limit, but when the person in front of you is having a lovely day and a nice drive out in the country. Worst situation of all is to speed around somebody and then or be angry at them, whatever, and then realize you know them. See, it's better for you. It's better for you. It's horrible to be a pastor. I think I've told you this before. In North Carolina, 2 churches 16 miles apart and 20 minutes driving, and I was supposed to have half an hour in between services to get there, but usually it was more like 17 minutes to get there. And so I got in the habit towards the end of my time in North Carolina. I wouldn't take off my robe after the first service. I would just say goodbye to everybody, get in the car, try to remember to get the skirts of my robe in the car and not leave them hanging out. One time I did that with my very favorite stole. It flapped 17 miles all the way back to town. But it saved me time, because then I could walk in, I could pull into the parking lot in Roanoke Rapids, and I would honestly grab my folder and my Bible, walk in the back door, up the steps, and walk straight up into the pulpit, and we would begin the service then, because I didn't usually have a liturgist, so I had to do it myself. That's not learning patience, that's just learning breath control, so that you can do that and walk in and people don't know that you've been running. But one day, we'd had a lovely service, we talked a lot afterwards, I was running it close, and the car in front of me was going about 5 miles an hour under the speed limit. The car I had at the time, you really needed a good long, flat, or downhill stretch in order to pass, because it didn't just have a whole lot of power. And so I had to plan my passes accordingly. So I'm going crazy. This person's going so slowly. And finally, there's a straight stretch. It's not really downhill, but if I put my feet really fast on the ground, I could maybe make it. And so I pulled out and pass, and find out one of my elders has got a new car, and they've been in worship with me, and who's passing them but their pastor, who's flying down the highway trying to get to the next church. This is not exactly what the Bible means with patience. It is some of it. Being patient with one another is part of it. You know, we have a term for being short-tempered. We don't have a good term for being long-tempered. We talk about people with a short fuse, but not usually about people with a long fuse. But that's generally what the idea is here. Long-tempered, long fuse, long-suffering, putting up with one another. Carl just chose the prayer at the very beginning. He didn't even know that this was one of the passages I decided not to use. But 2 Corinthians 6, Paul's qualifications for people who are going to be missionaries or servants of God, and patience is among them. And that didn't just mean pastors, because people were smiling as soon as I said that. No, I mean elders and deacons and people like that. Also, patience is one of the qualifications we are supposed to share. Great to hear that reminder from 2 Corinthians as well. Long-suffering, putting up with, forbearing, forgiving, being at peace with one another, all plays into patience, at least the way that the Bible understands it. So first point is this: God is patient. God is a patient God. And as we've talked about through all the fruits of the Spirit, if these various fruits of the Spirit or fruit of the Spirit are essential attributes, characteristics of God and God's personality, then we, as those created in God's image, are supposed to reflect those to the world also. Had a meeting with my pastor friend this week who says that these fruit of the Spirit are hierarchical. So he feels like love is the most important and that they go all the way down. I still don't agree with him, but it was interesting to hear him say that. I will agree love is the most important, and love is the fruit that reigns over them all. And maybe all these other fruit of the Spirit are spelling out what love is. But I'm pretty sure that we're not supposed to be less interested as we go down the list, or that as we go down the list they're somehow less important in some way. But if God is a patient God, then we are to be patient as God's people. But let's talk about God's patience. God is patient with us. That's why I had Carl read that passage from 2 Peter. Not only God's patience means salvation, or his version was, regard God's patience as salvation for you. God is patient with us. God also is patient in terms of time. We'll talk about that. God is patient with us, meaning putting up with us, long-suffering and forbearing patience with us. One of the best examples, and he said it was a good example, was Paul himself. Once upon a time, there was a man named Saul who was zealous for the law and zealous for God's way and right worship of the one true God. And it turns out that all these people were worshiping this man, Jesus, who'd been hung on a cross, so therefore had to be cursed by God. And they were worshiping him as the Messiah. So Saul was so upset about this, he starts persecuting the church and he starts throwing people in prison. He is trying to kill people. And on the road to Damascus, he meets Jesus, the risen Lord. Lived, died, rose again, ascended into heaven, and that's when Jesus and Saul at the time, meet. Best thing I read this week was that God's patience with Saul was a patience that bore with the persecutor until he overwhelmed him. God put up with someone persecuting followers of God's only begotten Son until such a time as he overwhelmed this persecutor and made him his own. God put up with Saul until he could make him Paul. God put up with Saul. God puts up with us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. When we were powerless, helpless, Christ gave us help, gave us power, gave us life. God is patient with us. Sometime ask me what else there is to know about that. So much. Biblical idea of long-suffering and wrath and judgment and all that. And we'll have to talk about that in a minute. Maybe that's enough. God put up with Saul until he could make him Paul. God is patient in working his purposes out. God is not insisting on his own way in such a way that he has this plan, he makes this perfect universe and this perfect world, and then he makes people in his own image and he puts them in this beautiful place, this Garden of Eden, and you would expect them to behave wonderfully all the rest of their days, which God intended to be forever and ever. Amen. He was going to have them live forever, but instead they turn away. God could have done a lot of things. God could have zapped the whole universe and started over. God could have done away with Adam and Eve and started over with a couple of other people that maybe he could get to follow in his way. But instead, God, knowing that we would turn away, put his plan of salvation into effect, and he is patient in working his purposes out. God is not in a hurry. God is not going to zap you if you don't get it the first time around. God is patient. But his patience is holding back judgment so that eventually he can offer us grace and mercy. Not in a hurry with God. 1,000 years is as a day, and a day is 1,000 years. And it doesn't mean that God just can't keep track of time. His calendars are no good. His watch is no good. It means that time is not the most important thing with God. He is patiently working his purposes out, the redemption of all of creation and our salvation. And finally, God's patience means salvation. Same passage in 2 Peter. On the one hand, Peter says, so God's looking at time very differently than we are. And then he also says God's patience means salvation because God desires that none should perish, but all should come to everlasting life. And his holding off on Jesus coming again, his holding off on the end of the world and all kinds of judgment means that people are coming into the kingdom every single minute, every single hour, every single day. More and more being added to the family of faith as the good news goes out, as the Holy Spirit works in people's hearts and lives, and they acknowledge Jesus Christ is Lord of all and my Lord too. This is an amazing thing. His patience means salvation. God is Lord of the universe and put creation together in such a way that it could go its own way and has. Adam and Eve kind of led the way, but all creation is groaning, longing for its redemption. All creation is waiting impatiently to be redeemed. But the Lord of the universe is not ruling with an iron fist. There is no insistence by God. You will do this my way, or you will be zapped forever. If so, we wouldn't have this conversation, because we would sin so early and so quickly that we would never be able to think about the fact that, hey, I am not dead yet, because we would be zapped immediately. God does not insist immediately on his own way. God is willing to yield control in all kinds of ways. Let creation go the way it goes, while providing a possibility of redemption for it. Not making us puppets. By the way, this is not the most compelling argument to me, but it must be to most of you, because everyone that I read about our free will and how God puts us together, everyone says, well, we don't want to be a puppet. If just being able to do the right thing meant that I didn't have to face eternal damnation, I would be willing to be a puppet, perhaps. God is not going to insist on that. God is going to let us go our way, and then woo us and invite us and overwhelm us with his love. Put up with us until we also can go from Saul to Paul, be entirely made over. Here's the last instance of God's patience, meaning salvation. The creator of the universe hung on a tree on behalf of creation and you and me. He was Lord over all. And he came as one of us, as a baby, lived his life, preached, taught, healed, died for you and me and for all of creation. The Creator hung on a tree on behalf of creation. God is a patient God with us in working his purpose out, and his patience means salvation for you and me. So, therefore, we, made in God's image, followers of Jesus Christ, children of God, are to be patient as well. Now, this is not fair, so I can't talk much about it, but here's the whole thing about worship and being impatient in worship. If we have a family gathering going on here, and say we have things to discuss as a family, or things to work on as a family, or things to learn about one another as a family, if in your own family gatherings, particularly when things are going just wonderfully, not when things are all crazy and horrible, when things are going wonderfully, how would you feel if you got together for a reunion and people said, you know what, we're going to catch up, we're going to have a good time, we're going to love each other, and we're going to do it in an hour, and we got to be out of here in an hour. That's all you got. We're a family gathering, and we have things to do, and we're the family of God, and God has promised to be here. And so it is a difficult thing for us to grow impatient with worship. Part of the problem is that we live in a world that is all worried about time. And what time is it? Am I going to be late? Am I going to be early? We are ruled by our watches, ruled by our schedules, ruled by that. And we also live in a time where we are supposed to be productive. And if we are not being productive, then something is terribly, terribly wrong. And that ignores entirely the call, the command to observe the Sabbath, to rest, not necessarily to be productive. It also means we misunderstand worship altogether. Not for the first time, not for the last time, let me remind you. The person up here in this pulpit, or the person doing music, the people leading special music, they are not the performers or the actors or the ones supposed to be working. We're just supposed to be leading you. You are the orchestra. And all that we do in this time together is to enable you to worship God in spirit and truth, to glorify God. It's what you're made for. It's what's supposed to delight us most. And sometimes I'm the reason you can't delight in that. And sometimes the wrong hymn is the reason you can't delight in that. And sometimes the temperature's wrong and so you can't delight in that. It's what we're made for. And when it's done best, then finally we get it. Oh, this is why we worship. Impatience in worship keeps us from joyfully entering into the presence of God. I am afraid. Patient with God may be one of the ways we're called to be patient. We are called to be patient as God is patient. Sometimes we're called to be patient with God, and we don't always want to be. Sometimes we have to be patient with God in his answering our prayers. God sometimes makes us wait a lot longer than we want. Sometimes we have to be patient because God does not give us the answer we want in prayer. I hope this is a problem for most of us. Sometimes we're impatient with God in growing us up, maturing us in our faith. We want to be stronger in our faith. We want to know God more and love our neighbors better and more. And sometimes that seems to be a slow process. It's a fruit of the Spirit, and fruit don't just instantly appear. The other major obstacle to our cultivating patience in our lives, of course, is that we live in a time of I want it now. If I want it, I want to have it now. There is no delayed gratification anymore. If I'm going to be gratified at all, I better have been gratified 5 seconds ago because it's still not here. I want to watch what I want to watch when I want to watch it, and I can do that more than ever before my whole life. I can watch what I want to watch when I want to watch it, which is profoundly unproductive, of course, if we're worried about being productive. If I want to get something, how long can I keep it? I am trying to cultivate patience in that regard. You may not know if you haven't lived someplace else recently, but if you're a big Amazon.com person, which I'm a huge Amazon.com person, principally opposed to it, you need to understand, principally in favor of independent local bookstores. However, limited budget, so I'm a big fan of Amazon. Right here, we are so close to an Amazon distribution center, you wouldn't believe how fast things get here. So I pay more money than I will ever tell you to be an Amazon Prime member every year, which means I get free shipping. I can get free 2-day shipping. I have to pay almost nothing for overnight shipping. But in Montoursville, if you get 2-day shipping, sometimes it comes the next day. I could order something when I leave here today, and it might be here tomorrow. That is thrilling for somebody like me, and does nothing to help me learn patience at all. It is not cultivating patience. I want it now. So one of the ways I do that is I fill up my Amazon shopping cart with things that I think I want, that I might someday buy. I have things in my cart from 2008, 2009 I haven't bought yet, but I'm sure thinking about it. My cart is filled with 33 items right now, only 1 or 2 of which might I buy before school starts. Probably not even then. I don't think that's making me much more patient. Having things immediately, wanting them now, does not help us be patient. We have to be patient with God in changing others, and that's maybe the hardest way. God, are you ever going to make this person a different person? Are you ever going to make them more thoughtful, more considerate, more forgiving, more loving? Are you ever going to have somebody pay attention to the fact that there's another person in the world, not just that one egocentric person? God is slow in changing others. And that may be being gracious to us. Sometimes we don't want God to change other people. We'd rather God just did away with them entirely. That's not a patient virtue. I hope that you grow impatient with God in making all things new and setting all wrong things right. End of Revelation, right? End of the whole Bible. Jesus said, behold, I make all things new. As believers, we're supposed to long for that day when all things are new and everything that is wrong is set right. And that's a prayer God loves to hear. The prayers of his people going, Lord, when will all things be new? Finally, and the biggest and most important, we are supposed to be patient with one another. In 2 Corinthians 6, which Carl began the service with, not so much in 2 Peter, certainly in Ephesians 4, as well as in Colossians 3, when Paul is telling us what we're supposed to be like, whenever Paul says, and be patient, he almost always follows it up with bearing with one another in love. Those things come together remarkably frequently. Corinthians, Ephesians, Colossians, other places as well. Why is that? Because we don't know what it means to be patient. And he means that patience has to do with putting up with one another. In the church, most of all, in the rest of our lives, if you want to be a witness for God and show God's light and love to the world, being patient with one another, forbearing, being long-suffering, putting up with those annoying habits, forgiving when we don't want to forgive, loving when we do not want to love, putting up with interruptions. I'm better at this than a lot of pastors. I only know this because I read a lot of other pastors writing about this. I'm not so much concerned with my time, particularly when I'm in the study. Most of the other time either. There are occasional exceptions. Thursday night, 10:45, not my most happy pastoral time, unless there's an emergency, in which case, happy to be there for you. Recently got a text at almost 11 on Thursday night. That's my weekend. Like Friday's my day off, so that's really a Friday night late thing. Other than that, interruptions are okay with me. Other pastors get driven crazy by this because they have a schedule and they have these things they have to get done all the time. I should not tell this story. But it is not really bad about Hobart Campbell at all, but it's about Hobart. Hobart one time called another pastor colleague of ours on a Monday, and had something to ask this pastor friend of ours, and then said, oh, by the way, what are you up to? Oh, I'm working on my sermon. Oh, my goodness, let me get off the phone. You need to get back to that. On a Monday. You call me on a Monday, I'm not always sure what we're going to talk about on Sunday. You can interrupt me on Monday, almost always. He was so concerned. Because, the sermon that Hobart would preach today, if he weren't in Germany, he would have done about 8-10 days ago. He's always a whole week ahead. I'm never a week ahead. Never at all. If you come in, it is very likely impossible for you to interrupt me in the middle of something that I think is truly important at the time. I might slightly be irritated because I didn't expect you, but I'm not really bound to the schedule. If you are one of those people who can't put up with interruptions, then this is a virtue we need to cultivate together, the virtue and fruit of patience. Because it is not your day and it is not my day. It is not your time, it is not my time. Time is a gift given to us by God. The day is a gift given to us by God. How do we think of each day? This is the day the Lord has made. I didn't make it. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. Sometimes the interruptions are where the real things happen. Professors and pastors need to hear that most of all, but maybe you need to hear that as well. What they tell a lot of seminarians and the ones who are listening is interruptions is where the ministry happens. So you can have your schedule fine. Be ready to throw it out the window at a moment's notice because something might happen that is God saying this is the thing to do now. Patient with others because God is patient with us. That's the bottom line. You know, Paul's great hymn of love, 1 Corinthians 13. After John 3:16 is the passage that I think is, well, John 3:16, Psalm 23. Then maybe 1 Corinthians 13 because people hear it at weddings and often at funerals and other times as well. What was the first thing that Paul says about love and the hymn to love? Love is patient. What is love like? When Paul is talking about the love of God and what it is like to be loving one to another, love is patient, love is kind. Love puts up with a lot. Love endures all things. God is patient. God is patient with us. God is patient in working his purposes out in his salvation for us. And we as his children are to be patient people as well. Patient with God, patient with one another. It's a fruit of the Spirit. Will you please join me in prayer? Oh Lord God, be patient with us when we are impatient. Teach us patience when we want to be impatient with one another. Help us to put up with one another because in so doing we might show the world that there is such a thing as a living, loving God. We might show the world there is such a thing as a true community in which people are bound together and love one another and forgive one another and put up with one another.